So you're wondering what has changed with Astrologian and Dawntrail. Astrologian has gotten some pretty controversial changes to its toolkit. The card system has been completely revamped, their draws no longer being RNG and giving a specific set of cards based on the draw cooldown used. Its healing toolkit almost remains exactly the same with no removals of actions outside of Astrodyne. Even skills like Sinistry continue to remain accessible, and in this video I will be giving my first impressions of the job through leveling it and playing it in the extreme trials. Astrologian and Dawntrail places a heavy emphasis on playing proactively, and while this is the standard at which you should play healers in general, its counterpart White Mage has the ability to play more reactively in situations that call for it. This is because the majority of Astrologian's toolkit has a metaphorical wind-up phase where it takes time to reach the maximum potential of HPS. Earthly Star, Celestial Opposition, Macro Cosmos, Horoscope, Collective Unconscious, and now its newly added action, Sunsign. These heals need to be deliberately planned to gain the maximum effectiveness of their use. This isn't isolated strictly to its AoE toolkit either, as its single target toolkit has received 2 new actions that play into this archetype in conjunction with Exaltation, the Arrow and the Ewer. It's also very important to know when your draw cooldown is going to be pressed again, as if it comes up during a mechanic and you get distracted, you might let it drift, which completely guts your rotation. This proactiveness doesn't just pertain to its toolkit, as Astro players will want to know a fight like the back of their hand if it has heavy movement sections, as they have little mobility to get from one place to the other without using swift cast or light speed. And while we're on the topic of these new actions, more specifically the cards, let's take a look into the new card system. Now, I'm not going to go too in depth on how the cards worked, as in my previous Astrologian video we went over them pretty extensively. Just know that Astral Draw gives the Balance, the Arrow, and the Spire, and Umbral Draw gives the Spear, the Bull, and the Ewer, each one doing unique effects based on the cards used. What really surprised me though when I first started leveling Astrologian, to my surprise, was that the card effects ended up stacking. For some reason I had thought that maybe you could play one card of each specific play cooldown. For example, if you play the Bull after you played the Arrow, it would overwrite it, but that is not the case, and with this knowledge it gives meticulous Astrologians the potential to stack 4 utility cards back to back, either on one specific target or throw them out on coordinated targets. The only condition that has to be met is that the damage you are trying to mitigate is within 10 seconds or so of your draw cooldown. This is also not something that may be optimal in all situations. Realistically, you'll want to space out your cards to cover a multitude of damage when certain conditions are met. It's just another avenue of planning that Astrologians can do that others cannot. It's not something you'll always do, but something you can do. A great example of this technique is when going into phase 2 in the Omega Protocol. You can hold the Spire from the odd minute Astral Draw and then use it on one of the tanks, and then after you press Umbral Draw, place the Bull and the Ewer on the same one. This enables you to support the tank that didn't get the cards with CI and Exaltation, enabling you to essentially cover and handle the incoming damage being dealt to both tanks. Another excellent use of this would also be in Dragon Song's Reprise. Assuming you are bursting right before Worm's Breath 2, you can use the Bull on the tank with the least defensives, the Spire on one of the melee DPS, and the Ewer on the tank that will be taking more damage from Cauterize. This enables you to not only stack Exaltation on the tank with the Bull, but gives you the option to delay it towards Cauterize for extra mitigation on either tank, while also not sacrificing a Celestial Intersection use by having to apply it to a melee. Again, while this is not always going to be optimal, the fact that players have this agency on how they want to use their cards is actually incredibly cool to me, and is probably the biggest thing carrying it from being totally monotonous. Outside of this specific niche, because Astrologians will always have one mitigation card at any given time, this means for hard-hitting AoEs like Nidhogg's Transition or Thea's Ultima, they can cover 4 non-tank players with single target mitigation through the use of Bull/Spire, 2 Celestial Intersections, and a Exaltation, giving you much more room for error on high % mitigation checks. This is coupled with their already insane levels of mitigation potential through Collective Unconscious and the new action Sunsign, with the ability to employ shields on the party through Neutral Sect. Outside of the cool carry potential that these new cards have, they still feel pretty odd. I don't want to say they're bad per se, but I just don't think they're very well designed when taking into consideration Astrologian's already strong healing kit. I'm very curious on Square Enix's thought process when adding just more healing into their already jam-packed healing kits. It almost seems like just an afterthought without taking into consideration the bigger picture. I think it would have been much more interesting if they actually added effects that interacted with the player's toolkits. In fact, I see the Arrow get a lot of hate, but it is probably the most interesting one to me because it's the card that you have to strategize around the most. Not only can you place it on a tank for a buster, use Celestial Intersection and then Exaltation them to increase the shield value and then the heal pop from Exaltation, but also then using Essential Dignity after, increasing the value of that heal as well. You also have the ability to use it by coordinating with a Scholar player to increase the size of their Adloquium shields, letting them deploy a much larger barrier. It's almost sad that they didn't bring time dilation back in some form, as that is a prime example of an ability that interacts with your toolkit that makes the healing actually fun. In fact, Uwer could have probably been this instead of a regen, increasing the duration of specific buffs on a targeted player by 10 seconds instead, giving the players agency on how they actually want specific things to interact with on a player instead of just haha here's a 1000 potency regen. And if they are afraid of how some things may be interacted with like Macrocosmos, they could have just added an exclusion to the rule. I also noticed when playing Astrologians that draw drift feels atrocious. Even just letting it drift a second or two over time just makes the lineup of your off GCDs appalling. What this means is that basically Astrologians will be forced to run a specific set of GCD timers that line up with our draw cooldown so it doesn't get pushed backwards. It's almost to the point where it's like, why didn't they just decrease the duration of lightspeed to 10 seconds and make it a 60-second cooldown? It also doubles down in the fact that because lightspeed almost always wants to be taken as a 2-minute cooldown to use in your divination window, this means Astrologian's mobility is still pretty bad, if not the worst out of the healers when trying to min-max their damage. Even just doing the first extreme trial, it was very important to pre-position for some attacks, as with bad RNG, you could be forced to go from one side to the other. Overall, I don't think the cards are super terrible, but they definitely have a lot of room for improvement. The current cards just feel like a tacked-on system without thinking about how they actually synergize on Astrologian. It is a bit sad that the ceiling of the job was almost gutted, and now players who enjoy the optimization and skill level of Astrologian generally have nowhere to go now, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see what 8.0 brings. Okay, finally moving on to some of the new changes. Oracle is an absurd ability. It makes Astrologian's already strong AoE damage toolkit even better, giving them a 912 potency attack with no fall-off damage, further increasing their already massive burst AoE potential. The only drawback of Oracle is that it is a targeted attack with a small radius around it, something that counterbalances their wide array of large radius attacks, meaning in situations where adds cannot be grouped up, you will lose value. With the existence of Earthly Star, Lord of Crowns, and Macrocosmos, all which hit practically the entire arena, this doesn't seem like much of an issue to me. I also noticed Oracle has some really weird delay in animation to damage being registered, so it can look pretty awkward when using it. The potency Malefic also increased to 270. This actually has several repercussions to the way GCDs are handled, as Macrocosmos did not get increased to 270. Honestly, it seems like an oversight, but who knows. Maybe they just don't care about that 20 potency every 3 minutes, or maybe they think that a 270 potency macro would break the balance of Astrologian's AoE. Gravity also did not see an increase in potency, meaning 2-target gravity is dead, and we will only use it on 3 targets plus now above level 94. Let's just hope that they don't add any more 2-target fights, or I'm going to cry. At least I can still live my 2-target gravity dream in UCOB. The 3-charge Essential Dignity just kind of exists. It's not bad, but it also just feels pretty underwhelming considering the state of its toolkit. Honestly, I'm a huge advocate for the charge system, but I think this is the first time they've added a 3-charge system for an actively used ability, and when going through the expansion, I didn't really find myself running into too many situations where I was waiting on 3 charges. It definitely feels like they just tacked this on without thinking, because White Mage got an extra charge of Tetragrammaton at level 98 as well. This is mainly going to be a boon in phases like in Ultimate, where there's a large downtime in tank damage, or just when starting an encounter, and technically having that extra charge at our disposal. I doubt we'll see much value of this change in Savage, because Savage fights generally have a higher rate of outgoing damage on tanks through auto attacks and continuous busters. Sun Sign is as insane as we thought it would be in the Media Tour, and even then some. It actually gives us the incentive to use Neutral Sect even when we don't want to use GCD heals, totally fixing the biggest problem with Neutral Sect itself. As previously, there were times when we wouldn't use the ability at all because there's just nothing to use it on. Not only this, but with Collective Unconscious, this puts Astrologian's total mitigative effectiveness up to 20% while simultaneously having the ability to apply barriers through Neutral Sect. And when used in conjunction with other abilities in our toolkit like previously mentioned, we can apply upwards to a theoretical 40% pseudo-mit on a selected handful of players at one time. Granted, I doubt you'd ever frontload this much mit, but it's interesting to even have that as a possibility. Astrologian's strength in fight design has always been the ability to mitigate damage in short intervals. For example, if there's an AoE every 60 seconds, Astrologians can mitigate every hit by alternating between Collective Unconscious and Neutral Sect, whereas White Mage can only mitigate one or the other. This was very prevalent in the Omega Protocol, where White Mage had to pick between either mitigating Cosmodive 1 and Meteors or just Wave Cannon 2. Meanwhile, Astrologians can mitigate both Cosmodives and both Wave Cannons, giving you a massive boon in survivability. This disparity is only going to get larger moving forward. With Sun Sign, as now you'll be able to mitigate an extra 10% of damage within 45 seconds of using Neutral Sect. Meaning with proper planning, we'll be able to cover multiple hits of an attack, or maybe just one attack later down the line after using it. Think of mechanics like in Dragon Song's Reprise when mitigating Akmorns. We theoretically We'd be able to use Neutral Sect to shield the Akmorns, and then towards the end of the duration as Sun Sign is about to fall off, we use it to cover the 3 hits of Giga Flare. Meaning, if we ever get outgoing damage like this again, the Sun Sign will be very strong. Honestly, the best part about Sun Sign is that it's just super versatile. We can use it in conjunction with Neutral Sect Aspected Helios to boost the survivability with shields. We can use it in place of Neutral Sect altogether, completely removing GCD heals and just applying the mitigation effect, or we can spread out the mitigation further apart from one another and get more value out of it. Honestly, amazing skill, 10 out of 10, would Higgs Boson again. I'm trying to think of anything else that comes to mind, but I don't think there's really too much else to say. The 2000 MP back in Drawl is really nice and completely nullifies the issue we had pre-expansion, meaning we won't need much piety if any at all. Overall, Astrologian is an extremely powerful job, and Dawntrail may be one of the strongest. Players have a variety of ways to handle incoming damage with their diverse healing toolkit, being able to manipulate and plan tools like Earthly Star, Macrocosmos, Horoscope, and now their newly added cards to heal later on down the line, while simultaneously having an extremely potent mitigation toolkit with the newly added Sun Sign, combined with Collective Unconscious and Neutral Sect barriers. With a proper healing plan in place, Astrologians will be a strong backbone of the party, being able to handle almost any and all situations with ease with their overabundance of actions. While Astrologians will have no problem being a strong job, its foundations lay in controversy and players will have split opinions for the entirety of the expansion. The players who like the job now because it plays like every other healer will fancy the changes, but the players who liked it because it was Astrologian, these changes may leave a bitter taste in their mouth. It doesn't help that with the newest iteration of the card system being a little bit tacked on and sometimes useless, compounded with the effect of having no mobility, and if you let your draw drift at all, is extremely punishing to not only your damage contribution, but the healing side as well, as the utility cards get pushed back. It's no surprise to me that there's a large amount of people who are not happy with these changes. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video where we'll be going over Sage.